The heat shimmered off the plains like a living thing, twisting the horizon into a wavering mirage. The Pecos River wound sluggishly through the scrub, its banks lined with willows that offered more illusion of shade than comfort. Buzzards wheeled high above, and cicadas shrieked in the brittle grass. Will Tanner rode slow, sweat tracing pale lines through the dust on his face. His horse, an old sorrel mare he'd named Bess, stumbled once or twice, tired from the journey. The saddle creaked as he leaned forward to pat her neck. "Just a little further, girl," he murmured. "They say the Apache keep good stock. If we're lucky, maybe we'll trade this time and not get shot at." His words fell into the heavy air unanswered. Ahead, thin threads of smoke rose from the river bend, the Apache camp. Will straightened his back, pulling off his hat to wipe his brow. It was risky business, riding into native land with only a handful of dollars and a heart too stubborn for its own good. But he was a man with little left to lose. The last of his cattle had died in a drought that didn't end soon enough, his ranch half built, his prospects none. He needed a horse strong enough to plow and pull, or he wouldn't make it through the next season. When he reached the edge of the camp, a dozen pairs of dark eyes were already watching him. Men stepped out from the circle of hide tents, tall, silent, and armed. Will halted his mare and raised one hand in peace. "I come to trade," he said, voice low but steady. "No trouble." There was a tense pause, then one of the older warriors said something sharp in Apache. Another man, younger, with a scar running down his cheek, replied in English. "You trade what?" Will eased himself down from the saddle, feeling the grit in his joints. "I got $12, he said, pulling the folded bills from his vest pocket. "I need a strong horse. Good for land work." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The young man's eyes flicked over him, then turned toward a cluster of men near the largest tent. From its shadow, an old man stepped forward, straight-backed, silver-haired, his face carved deep with age. Chief Cotto. Will had heard the name before in Pecos, a man of his word, but not one to be crossed. The cowboy bowed his head slightly. "Chief," he said respectfully. Cotto regarded him for a long moment, saying nothing. Then, in slow English, he asked, "You buy horse?" "Yes, sir." The chief nodded once, motioning to a pen where several horses grazed near the river. Among them, Will spotted a bay mare, powerful, clean-legged, bright-eyed. Exactly what he needed, he pointed. "That one." The chief followed his gesture, then said something to the young man, who laughed under his breath before translating. "Good horse, not cheap." Will managed a tired smile. "She don't have to be cheap. Just fair. I got $12, every penny I own." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. He stepped closer, the wind tugging at his long gray hair. 12, he repeated slowly, like tasting the word. Then he looked at Will, not just at his clothes or the money in his hand, but through him, as if measuring the worth of the man himself. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Cotto gave a small nod. He said something low in his own language, and one of the men brought the mare forward. She tossed her head, restless but well-trained. Will felt a spark of gratitude stir in his chest. "Fair trade?" he asked quietly, but the chief's gaze had turned elsewhere, behind him. Will followed it and saw two young women standing at the edge of the camp. Both wore long doeskin dresses and braids dark as the river mud. One was tall, poised, her eyes calm and unflinching. The other, younger by several years, seemed to glow with restless energy, curiosity shining in her face. Cotto said something in Apache to them. The elder sister's jaw tightened, the younger's eyes widened, and murmurs rose among the gathered people. Will frowned. He didn't understand the words, but he could feel the shift in the air. Then the chief turned back to him. "You buy horse," Cotto said in English, his tone firm. "You take what comes with horse." Will blinked. "What comes with it?" The old man's voice carried across the camp like a quiet thunder. "My daughters." The world seemed to go still for a beat. The river murmured behind them. The fire popped. Will felt the wind lift the hair at his neck. I don't follow," he stammered. Cotto's dark eyes remained steady. "You pay. You trade. We trade true. Horse and daughters. They will work, cook, keep house. It is honor. They go with man who pays fair." The older daughter stepped forward then, chin high, eyes sharp as a hawk's. She said something brief and proud in Apache, and the chief nodded approvingly. The younger one looked at Will with something between fear and fascination, fingers tightening around the strap of her bundle. "I don't mean any disrespect," Will said slowly, but I ain't looking for that kind of trade." The chief's face didn't change. "You insult my word." Will froze. He could feel every gaze on him, the men, the women, the quiet, waiting camp. To refuse outright would mean dishonor, and dishonor here could get a man buried before sundown. He looked at the horse, strong, calm, breathing softly. Then at the girls, one proud, one nervous. Then back at the chief. "No, sir," he said at last. His voice was low, his heart hammering. No insult meant. A deal made in honor's a deal I'll stand by. The chief's eyes softened, just barely. He spoke to his daughters again, and they stepped forward. The older one bowed her head slightly. "I am Sani," she said in careful English. "This is my sister, Atsa. You pay $12. We belong with you now." Will swallowed hard, looking at them, then at the chief. "I reckon I understand." The chief nodded, satisfied. "You treat them fair, Cowboy," he said. "The land watches." "I will," Will promised quietly. Kato placed a hand on his shoulder, brief and heavy. Then he turned away, and just like that, the trade was finished. Will stood there, stunned, as the camp began to move again, laughter, conversation, smoke rising from the fires. The two young women waited silently beside the horse, their faces unreadable in the blazing light. He exhaled, long and slow, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well," he muttered under his breath, "guess $12 buys more than I bargained for." The older girl's brow lifted slightly, as if she understood his tone. The younger one smiled faintly, just a flicker. The prairie changed its face as they rode west, from endless sun-baked flats into slow, rolling country where dry grass gave way to green and the air grew cooler. By the second evening, the horse was tired, and so were they. The two sisters never complained. They rode behind him, quiet as shadows, their hair catching light like ribbons of midnight. Sometimes, Atsa hummed softly, songs that sounded like wind through pine needles. Will didn't understand the words, but the sound filled the silence between hoofbeats and loneliness. When the outline of his land finally appeared, a rough stretch of dirt bordered by a creek and a few twisted cottonwoods, Will's throat tightened with something like shame. The cabin wasn't even finished. 3 walls stood crooked against the sunset, a pile of lumber stacked beside them. His fencing sagged, a water barrel leaned empty. He dismounted slowly, dust swirling around his boots, and turned toward the two girls. "Ain't much to look at," he admitted, voice rough. "But it's home, or it will be." Sani, the older sister, dismounted in one smooth motion and looked around. Her eyes moved like someone taking measure, not of wealth, but of what could be built. "You build with your hands," she said after a moment. "That is good." Atsa slid off the horse too, grinning as her feet hit the earth. "We can help," she said brightly. "We know how to make things strong." Will smiled faintly. "Reckon I'll take all the help I can get." The three of them stood there for a long moment, the sky turning orange and violet behind the half-built home. For the first time since Pecos, Will felt something easing in his chest. Maybe it was the simple fact he wasn't alone anymore, even if this strange companionship had started by accident. He led the horse to the small corral, tossing it some leftover hay. When he turned back, the girls had already started unpacking. Sani was gathering fallen branches, efficient and wordless. Atsa was arranging stones for a fire pit, humming again. It struck him that they moved together like two parts of one rhythm, the elder's calm balance offsetting the younger's energy. "You girls don't have to work," he said quietly. "You can rest. You've had a long ride." Sani didn't even look up. "We work before rest," she replied simply. "That is how things live." He chuckled softly, scratching at his stubble. "Guess I can't argue with that." By the time the stars began to appear, they'd built a small fire. The sisters cooked from their own provisions, cornmeal cakes and something fragrant from a pouch of herbs. The scent filled the air, warm and earthy. Will hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell hit him. They sat in a loose circle, the firelight flickering over their faces. Atsa passed him a small wooden bowl. "Eat," she said cheerfully. "You're thin." He laughed, shaking his head. "Been a hard few months." She nodded solemnly, though she couldn't hide her grin. "Then eat more." He obeyed. The food was simple but rich, grounding. After a few bites, he realized Sani was watching him, not unkindly, just studying him, as though she were trying to decide what kind of man he truly was. He met her gaze, but she didn't look away. "You had family before," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Yeah," he said finally. "Wife." Long time ago. Fever took her. The fire popped, sparks spinning upward into the dark. Atsa's expression softened. You alone since then? He nodded. Ain't easy being alone out here. You start talking to the wind just to hear something talk back. The sisters exchanged a glance, and Sani said softly, no man should eat or build alone. Will smiled sadly. I'm learnin' that now. The night deepened. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the creek. The fire burned low, casting long, orange shadows on the rough boards of his cabin. He spread his bedroll near the wall and offered them the lean-to beside the house. They refused politely, preferring to sleep closer to the fire. Safer, Sani explained. Fire keeps night things away. He nodded, too tired to argue. Lying awake later, he listened to the low murmur of their voices, the rhythm of their language soft and flowing. It made him ache in a way he didn't expect, not from pain, but from the reminder of what life sounded like when it wasn't empty. When dawn came, the prairie was washed in gold and silver. Will rose early, expecting to start his usual chores, fixing the fence, hauling water, shaping beams for the cabin. But to his surprise, the women were already up. Sani stood by the half-built wall, examining his carpentry with a critical eye. You use wrong nails, she said without preamble. He blinked. Ma'am, she held up one of the nails he'd been using. Too short, wind will pull your wall down. He couldn't help grinning. Reckon you've built before. Her eyes glinted faintly. My people build lodges that stand through wind and war. He tipped his hat. Then I'll take your advice. By noon, they'd made more progress than he had in a month. Sani worked silently, lifting and steadying logs like she'd done it all her life. Atsa fetched water, chopped kindling, and sang while she worked. The rhythm of life settled into the place, a harmony he hadn't known he'd been missing. When the cabin's final beam went up, Atsa cheered, clapping her hands. It stands. Will laughed, breathless and sweating. It sure does. Sani nodded, wiping her brow. Now it is a home. Something about the way she said it made his throat tighten. Yeah, he said softly. Maybe it is. That night, they ate again by the fire, but this time the air between them felt different, easier, warmer. Atsa teased him about his crooked boots. Sani even smiled once, quick and small. The sound of laughter drifted through the new cabin's doorway. Will looked at them, these two unexpected souls sent into his life by a deal he hadn't meant to make, and felt a quiet, growing gratitude. I don't know what the chief thought sending you with me, he said finally, but I'm glad he did. Sani's gaze met his across the fire, steady as always. Maybe he saw a man who needed help, she said simply. Or a man who needed family, Atsa added, grinning. Will chuckled softly. Maybe both. The stars spread wide above them, the wind whispering through the tall grass. Somewhere, the horse snorted softly in the corral. For the first time in years, Will Tanner didn't feel like a man waiting for life to begin again. He felt like he was already living it, one nail, one meal, one moment of laughter at a time.